Looking back, my earliest memories of what would become the Women's Center were Ellen and Ann talking about creating a resource center for women.
That resource wasn't there before, so one of the reasons they started the storefront was where men had bars to go to or VFW clubs, women had no place to go to connect with one another.
It wasn't until after they had been open for a year as this Women's Resource Center that they discovered a lot of the women that were calling them were victims of domestic violence, survivors of domestic violence.
So it was a storefront, and there was a sign which I saw as I came in that they just hung up and said, "We're here to help women who are in abusive situations. And can we get help from anybody who has skills at dealing with people who are in a tricky situation?" I was a social worker, and Ann and I knew each other from the Unitarian Church. And we understand that you know how to do this new thing called active listening. So would you be willing to teach that to the volunteers who are going to help the clients coming in? So we did that, and it was great fun.
I became connected to Women's Center and Shelter after a period of about 2.5 years of domestic violence, during which time I couldn't find any way to get out of it because I was 14 when I got married, and a married woman who's a minor, their husband is their legal guardian. So of course, I couldn't get out. It was very hard. I did not know there was a Women's Center and Shelter until one time when one of the policemen gave me a little card that said, you know, you could call this number. And that's how I got connected with Ellen Berliner and Ann Statler. I went through the door, and the first thing I noticed was that the quiet. Not the quiet of, a quiet room. The quiet of all my fears. Like, there's no danger here.
In the very early days when this center first started getting going, there were very few other centers. And it could be wonderful that they were one of only 6, but they were only one of 6. So they definitely were hunting each other up, trying to find other people who had realized that this was an issue, and networking and using each other as resources. So I think that they were a seed and an encouragement to all the people who were I say all the people, but the few people who were actually working on this issue.
Ann and Ellen were, I think, 2 of the strongest people I've ever met, 2 of the most brave, the most innovative. To be able to look around them in the early 1970s, the lack of understanding at that point by everybody that domestic violence is not just a one-time occurrence, that it's a pattern of power and control. That was absolutely not understood at that point. So the bravery that they had at starting a whole organization just to work with those who were experiencing something that most of the country didn't believe actually was a problem. That's grit.
I think there was still a lot of stigma attached, even in the late 90s, to talking about it, to being a victim, to admitting that you're a victim. So I think a lot of the work that we were talking about doing at the time was just making sure people were aware of the services, but making sure people felt comfortable and, continually looking for more ways for women who were at risk to find help, whether it was directly, in residence here, looking for counseling, looking for housing, but just getting the word out. I came away from my board service with a much more holistic view of both the challenges of delivering service and, who are all the people impacted, and it can't be people you really wouldn't expect to be in that kind of situation.
When I was hired, I was like in the low 30s. I was the 33rd or the 34th employee ever at Women's Center and Shelter. So the growth over that time has just been absolutely wonderful. It has become more acceptable. It has become more okay, if that's proper to say, to be able to talk about intimate partner violence. It used to be like we didn't want to tell people where we work because of the stigma that goes along with it and everything that comes, but I'm proud to say where I'm working. And I will say that's something else that I would say has increased awareness. Now when I say where I work, people immediately say, oh, thank you. That's such hard work, or that's such good work. So people do recognize that it is something that we still need to do.
When I was hired in 1996, I was the first attorney to work as a staff person at Women's Center and Shelter. There was a small Allegheny County task force with participation from different folks in the justice system, but there were not many specialists in domestic violence. So now we have a domestic violence unit of police in the Pittsburgh Police Department. We have domestic violence prosecutors in the district attorney's office. We have probation officers who are domestic violence specialists. We have judges who specialize in domestic violence. None of that existed in 1996, or very little of it. Most exciting recently is that most of those specialists are now participating in an improved Allegheny County task force and leadership team where we have commitment from the top to try to bring everyone together to improve the system.
Now it's changed so much. We've gone through another renovation. It's a much different kind of more broad-based board, I think, in terms of size, in terms of diversity of people on the board. The much larger program than we had before. There weren't batterers programs, and back in the day, I think there was really just it was a short-term shelter. The counseling programs, the children's programs, the IT work, the finances, the whole thing's just gotten much more complicated, much more sophisticated than it was. But seems like probably 40 some years ago.
What the community means to Women's Center and Shelter is, without exaggeration, everything. The community means everything to us. We could not do the work that we do without the community. Whether we're talking about our community partners, whether we're talking about volunteers, whether we're talking about donors, on every sense of the word, the community is what makes Women's Center and Shelter tick. Without the community, Women's Center and Shelter literally wouldn't exist.
My parents were Ted and Shirley Craig. My parents became involved at Women's Center and Shelter over 30 years ago. The involvement started when my father was a partner at Kirkpatrick and Lockhart, which is a law firm downtown. Rachel Laurie Allen, who is a longtime shelter board member, and she chairs the Celebrating Survivors event, approached my father to secure the firm's support for the shelter's needs and services. He readily agreed, and he also provided his own personal support and involvement. Through over 30 years of the involvement, we've seen Nicole Molinaro and her entire team work so tirelessly. They're dedicated, they're devoted, they're engaged, they're talented, and they're hardworking, and they make such a profound impact on the lives of so many in the community. And so my sisters and I are, I think, grateful that our parents began working with such an exceptional organization and made us aware of the important work being done here.
John was one of the first male board members here. And when I look back then, that wasn't so common. So I love that that was his involvement, or one of his involvements, but that was one that was very dear to his heart and remains so. And then he brought our family into it too, and for the grandchildren. To this day, there's another association with some very dedicated volunteers at UPMC in the Wolf Center for Safety. And they come 2 or 3 times a year to prepare 2 or 3, usually lunch and dinner for the ladies here. And usually I'm with them, or my daughter, Julie Wolf-Rost, is there. Oftentimes her children, our grandchildren, are there. So that continues on, and I hope it always will, because I love that, and I think Don would too.
For me, The engagement with the children when we're here has always felt good. Bringing smiles to those kids' faces. When I was in 10th grade, spending a summer here, just being on the floor with them, or watching Sloan decorate cookies with them, or Maxwell blowing bubbles at a barbecue or something, and just hoping that that was a bright spot in their day.
Over the last 50 years, there's been so much change, but yet so many things remain the same. I think about our donors and our supporters who, through their generosity, we've been able to continue the work of Women's Center and Shelter for over 50 years, provide new programs, new services for our survivors. I think about all the board of directors, beyond none. They've been so very supportive.
I have stayed at Women's Center and Shelter for the last 28 years because the work has immense value to me. Working with survivors, seeing their successes, their problems, and overall their amazing resiliency has really motivated me to continue to try to do better as an attorney in the domestic violence field. And all of the support of my coworkers has really made it possible.
What motivates me to continue to do the work is very simply those we work with. Our clients who are experiencing domestic violence are the bravest, most resilient, strongest people I've ever met. And they really are the whole motivation for what I do.
I just marvel to this day. I'm sorry. Of what a special, unique person that Ellen was. And then they would say she was the heart of the movement and my mother was the brains. And that combination was the key. And when they recognized this need, they did something about it.
I just have to say that there's not too many women in the world that would do what those two women did. They literally gave up so much of their time, their talent, and their treasure to build the Women's Center and Shelter to save women like me.
They would be so proud of everything that everybody's doing, and it would be just perfectly fitting in with their goal. They wanted it to be available to the most number of people possible and their children. And the fact that we have this building, and I just had a short tour, it's just incredible. They're smiling down.